Okay, so our bell ringer today, we have our first problem, which we're solving for x. So right now we have x and the square root of 3 being multiplied together. How do I find x, or how do I get it by itself? Divide. We're going to divide. You see that multiplication is happening. So just like Rio said, we're going to divide by the square root of 3. We end up with 8 over the square root of 3 equals x. I'd actually like to rewrite that. I want to put the x on the other side. X equals. But we see we have a radical in the denominator. So in your Algebra 1 class, you probably remember learning about how you cannot have radicals in the denominator. So when you have a radical in the denominator, to get rid of it, we multiply the numerator and the denominator by that radical. So since that's radical 3, we multiply by the square root of 3 over the square root of 3. So since it's the same thing in the numerator and denominator, that's like multiplying by 1, so we're not actually changing the number. Over here, we end up with 8 square root of 3 all over the square root of 3 times 3, which is 9. Now that you see that, we have x equals 8 square root of 3. What is the square root of 9? 3. Nice job. Okay, so that is our first problem. I hope that you arrived at something like that. Okay, so now we have a problem set up much like the Pythagorean theorem. So we want to solve for a, and the way we're going to do this is subtracting that 8 squared over. What is 8 squared?
64.
Yep, so you end up with a squared plus 64 equals 256. We're going to subtract that 64 over. When you subtract that 64 over, what do we arrive at? What number did you guys get? 192. Sorry, I didn't hit you, hon. 192. We want to get our a by itself. Since it's being squared, we have to square root it. It's the inverse operation. We end up with a equals, and we're going to create this factor tree. Okay, so we see that 2 goes into 192. We see it goes into it how many times? 96 times. We also see that 2 goes into 96. How often does it go into 96? 48. And we know that at 48, we can take a 4 and a 12. Our 4 goes 2 and 2. Our 12 goes 3 and 4. And then our 4 goes 2 and 2. So what has buddies? We're going to circle. We see right here we have a pair of 2s. Yep. So we end up with a equals 2 times 2 times 2. And what doesn't have a buddy? 3. Exactly right. A equals 8 square root of 3. And our last problem here, we see that we have the square root of 17 squared. Squares and square roots are inverses. So when you see them together, they cancel each other out, and we're just left with 17. So we have 17 plus b squared equals 152. Subtract 17 to the other side. We end up with b squared equals... So the square root and the square are inverses. So if you would work this out, it'd become 17 times 17, and they'd be buddies themselves. But so when you see the two of them happening together, you can always just write what's left. Okay, so what is 152 minus 17?
16.
Okay.
150. No, that can't be right. I don't know. I give up.
What'd you get? Okay, what'd you get? Okay, so why don't we look and see what we arrived at? So we see that if we carry the 1 over, you have 12 minus 7. What is 12 minus 7? We end up with 1/3. When we square root both sides, we know that 5 goes into 135. How many times? Goes in there. So 5 goes into 13.
It's 20 plus something.
What did you say it was?
27.
27. And then we know the factors of 27 are 9 and
3.
And 9 breaks down to be 3 and 3. We circle what has a buddy. Pair of 3s. 3 comes out. What doesn't have a buddy stays multiplied together. What'd you say, Rio? I'm sorry. Yep, exactly right. So we end up here with b equals 3 square root of 15. we learned about a special right triangle of 45, 45, 90. So a right triangle that has the two side angles being 45 degrees. So this is the second round of a special right triangle. This is a 90, well it's 30, 60, 90. And then it has special ratios with their side lengths. So you see that your small side here is being represented by the x. Your hypotenuse is double that. And your other leg is going to be the square root of 3 times that. So you'll be responsible for knowing this. I'm going to put it on your quiz, and you're going to have to fill this triangle and the 45, 45, 90 out with these side lengths. But you have to have these. So take a second and write them down. When we're doing this, we know that we have the values of 1. Oh, give me 1 second. I apologize. Okay, here we go.
Mr. Jenkins, you guys draw triangles again?
I do. You have a side length of 1, square root of 3, and 2. You see that 1 is the square root of 1, right? And 2 is the square root of 4. So you see the square root of 3 is actually between those two. So you know the biggest side is the 2, the small side is the 1, and the square root of 3 is in the middle. And the sides correspond with the angles. So the smallest side is across from the smallest angle. So here we see that 30 is directly across to the one that has the coefficient of 1. 60 is across from the one that has the coefficient of square root of 3. And then the biggest side is across from 90, which is our biggest angle. Okay, for our first one, we see we have the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is 10. If we go over here to that triangle I just gave you, which one of these sides corresponds to the hypotenuse? The x, the 2x, the x square root of 3. So right here we have the hypotenuse, the one directly across from the right angle. Which one of these is directly across from the right angle?
60.
The 2x. So we take that 2x.
Where the 2x at, Ms. Jenkins?
Okay, so we have this problem here.
Follow the little formula thing that she starts to
Yep.
do here.
You get 2x.
And then we apply it with the formula triangle. That's a good way of putting it. So you start with, no, it's a good question to ask. It's better to know now before we get to all the problems. So you see here that we took the 2x from here, because this is the side length in our formula triangle, and this is the side length that we have. We set them equal and we solve for x. So I'm going to divide by 2. X equals 5. Okay, so now that we have that, we need to substitute that in and solve for our remaining sides. So if I'm looking for the side that is across from 30 degrees, what is our formula for that side? It's just x. So we know down here, across from that, it's going to be x, and my x value is 5. Okay, the side directly across from the 60 degrees, what's our formula value? X what?
3.
Square root of 3. Our x value is 5. Square root of 3 is our side length. So you take what you have, you set it equal to what is in our formula triangle, you solve for x, and then you substitute it into our problems. Yes, Nemo? Looking at question number 2, you see that we have our 60-degree angle. The side directly across from us, what we have is that 6 square root of 3. If you go to our formula triangle, you have the 60-degree angle. Which side is opposite of that? So that's the one we're going to use. We're going to set those equal. We have x square root of 3 equals 6 square root of 3. Yeah, Zeke. We can go through the math. We can divide the square root of 3 over. You end up with x equals, my square roots of 3's cancel, 6. Now that we have our x value, we can go about solving it. So the side opposite of the 30 is going to be what?
Now this is how it
Okay.
happens. Move from there, put in the comment with 6 to the 3. So you just take that and do 2x, put 6 into 2x.
Mhm.
That's right, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Yep, that's exactly what you do. So here you see across from the 30 is just that x. Well, we know that x equals the square root of 6, so we know that this side is going to be 6. And then our hypotenuse has the formula of 2x. Our 2 times our 6 gives us 12. Okay, so right now we now have the side opposite of our 30. On our formula triangle, which one is opposite of 30? No, only one is. So it's just x, right? Directly across. So we see that this is going to be your x value right here. So then, yes, Randall?
How do you know where to start?
So I looked to see which side I have. And since I knew I had 8, I looked what's across from it. And that's how I did it. So I worked
So
backwards.
we go from the outside.
And so over here, I have now my outside, which was 8, across from that 30. And now I want to find these two sides. Okay, so please cut back on your conversation. So across from our 60, we have x square root of 3. So here we know across from our 60 is x square root of 3. We take our x value, which was 8, and we substitute it in 8 square root of 3. And then our last part here is to find our hypotenuse. Our hypotenuse is 2 times x. So that's the side across from our right angle. So that's going to be 2 times 8, which is 16. Right now, which side do we have? The side opposite of which angle?
We have one of the legs.
We do. We have one of the legs, which is directly across from the...
60.
Yep, it's directly across from that 60 degrees. Having one that's across from 60 degrees lets me know when we go to our formula triangle which side length is directly across from that 60 degrees. I hear it. X square root of 3. So now I can set those equal to each other and solve. I'm going to divide by square root of 3. I end up with x equals 9. Again, you can look at that and see that value. You do not have to work that out. I do not need to see that math. But should you? Not on that portion. You do not necessarily have to. So after that, we need to see which sides we don't know. We don't know the side directly across from the 30. Across from the 30 has what for our formula? X, which means that this side has to be. And then our hypotenuse is 2x, which is going to be 2 times 9, which is 18. Okay, so our first one, number 5, we see we have the side length of the hypotenuse. In our formula triangle, what is our hypotenuse formula? 2x. So you're going to take the 2x and set it equal to that 24. You're going to solve for x. What is our x value? 12. Which side length is just x, the one opposite of? 30 degrees. So we go to 30 degrees. The one directly across from it has to be 12 because that's our x value. And then our last step is to find the one opposite of our 60 degrees. The one opposite of our 60 degrees is that x square root of 3. So I'm just going to substitute in. I end up with 12 square root of 3.
I'm still trying to find the shortcut for this whole process.
Our next one, we have 51. 51 is which side length? 2x again. We see that 51 equals 2x. We're going to divide by 2. X equals, you can leave it as 50. Yep, that's what I'm going to use. You can leave it as 51 over 2, but I like it better as 25.5 for this case. But I'll accept either. After that, we know our x value is that. Which side length is opposite, or which angle is opposite of our side length of x? 30 degrees. So that means down here, across from the 30, we have x equals 25.5. And then the side length opposite of our 60 is still going to be that x square root of 3, which is 25.5 square root of 3. Okay, we have 2 more. We're going to make it through them. So right now we have the 36. The 36 is opposite of which angle? It's opposite of 60. And we know the formula for the side opposite of 60 is what? X square root of 3. We need to get our x by itself, so we're going to divide by square root of 3. I end up with x equals 36 divided by the square root of 3. We cannot have a radical in the denominator. I need to rationalize. The way we do this is we take that radical. We do exactly what Rio says. We multiply numerator and denominator by square root of 3 over square root of 3. This becomes 36 square root of 3 all over the square root of 9. Because you multiply what's inside the radicals together. Yeah, it is one more step. We see that the square root of 9 is what? 3. And then now we can see that 3 goes into 36 how many times? 12. Nice job. So we end up with x equals 12 square root of 3. Now we have, this is our x. The side opposite of our 30 is our x, which means that x equals 12 square root of 3 here. And our hypotenuse is 2 times x. So that's going to be the 2x, which we know as, I'm going to do the math over here, 2 times x, which is 2 times 12 square root of 3, which you know is going to be 24 square root of 3. And last but not least, we have the question that has the side opposite of 30. What is our formula for that side? What value is it? Side opposite of 30 is? X. Which means our hypotenuse is 2x, which is going to be 2 times 8 square root of 3, which is 16 square root of 3. And then we know over here it is going to be x square root of 3, which is 8 square root of 3 times the square root of 3, which gives me 8 times the square root of 9. What is the square root of 9? 3 times 8 is? 24.